Welcome, everyone, to a Wednesday evening with the Clear Mountain Monastery community. We're very happy this evening to have Bhante Jayasāra with us. Bhante Jay, thanks for joining us.
Good to be here with you, Ajahn.
Yeah. So I'll just read a quick biography and then we'll jump right into questions. So Bhante Jayasāra, aka Bhante Jay, was ordained in 2016 at the age of 38 by Bhante Gunaratana of Bhavana Society. Bhante shares the Dhamma and leads retreats online and in person across the country. He specializes in showing how the ancient teachings of the Buddha are practical, pragmatic, and able to be put into practice by modern people in the modern world, just as he did as a professional person in the world before becoming a monastic to more deeply pursue the path. He is the founder of the Magga Seka Discord community and YouTube channel, and after several years as a nomad monk, is now hoping to start the process of nurturing an in-person community, hopefully in Colorado at some point in the coming years. So, Bhante Jay, I know you studied cultural anthropology in school, and all three of us are what anthropologists might call convert Buddhists. Could you describe what is a convert Buddhist, and are there any major conversion experiences that you had? What were you converting from? What did you convert to? And what was the major conversion event?
Well, I guess I would describe a convert Buddhist as somebody who essentially was not born in a Buddhist culture, right? Being enculturated by Buddhism from a young age. I'm sure we've all seen, like, when they bring the little kids to a dana and they say bow, and it's like a little, like, 2-year-old kid, bowing and stuff like that. So that, us, like myself and you guys, we kind of started when we were much older. So we're, not born into it.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess for myself, I was raised Catholic. I was born Catholic. I was an altar boy. I went to Catholic school my whole life until college. And by the time I was like 16, I knew that I wasn't a Catholic. It's just, from a young age, I kind of felt more connected with Eastern ways of thought and Eastern philosophy. Even like rebirth. One joke I always tell people, but it's real. It's actually happened. I can remember being like 9 or 10 years old, an altar boy on the altar with the priest holding the book while he's doing the benediction. And I was thinking, was I Julius Caesar or Alexander the Great in a formal? Which one was I? And, when I look back at that, as I look back at my life when I became a monk, I was like, wait a second. That's quite interesting. But from what I say is, like, by the time I was from 16 to age like 29-ish, I would say I was a student of all religions and a practitioner of none. Like you mentioned, anthropology was my major in college, and I've always been a student of human nature and human culture. I love it. And it also, kind of impacts how I read the suttas as well. But like around age 28, I started really kind of wanting to have a spiritual path. And by that point, I had studied all the different religions enough that I knew that if I was going to have a spiritual path, it was going to be Buddhism. I didn't know what type of Buddhism. As somebody, kind of growing up in the 90s, I was very influenced by Tibetan Buddhism at that time. There was a bunch of movies like 7 Years in Tibet, and the Dalai Lama was big then. So kind of Tibetan Buddhism is what I knew. And then, so I was like, okay, I think I'm going to try this Buddhist thing. And the first kind of little monastery, a little vihara I found was about 40 minutes from me in New Jersey. And it was a Vajrayana, I think Mongolian Vajrayana monastery, just a typical kind of vihara, like a little house, one monk. And that's kind of where my journey started. But over like a year and a half, 2 years going through, kind of realizing, okay, Tibetan's not really for me. Going to a couple Mahayana places, like a Chinese Chan monastery up in northern New Jersey, Bodhi monastery, where actually I would become a Buddhist, where I took the refuge in the precepts for the first time. Also wasn't for me. It was kind of like when I found theravada, and then when I found especially the suttas, it was like a missing puzzle piece I always had my whole life. It felt like coming home. And all these years later, pretty much believing at this point, this is not my first life as a monk. I understand why I came home. So yeah, that's kind of the short of it.
Thank you, Bhante. I had whoa, there we go. I grew up, strangely enough, somewhat Buddhist, and yet I also had that coming home sense. And part of your teachings are really known for really keeping their integrity and taproot in the suttas. And certainly, I've tuned into many of your teachings at Empty Cloud and elsewhere, where you kind of move through the early Buddhist texts. And I know a lot of us, like when we first encounter the Buddha's words, just the sense of luminosity and wisdom that shines through. So one question I love to ask monks who are grounded in the EBTs, the early Buddhist texts, what can you give us your two of your favorite suttas, one well-known and one hidden gem, and tell us why?
Well-known has to be Sala Sutta, the simile of the arrow. That was one of those suttas I remember reading years ago, and it just felt like Buddha was being my psychotherapist. Like it was just like it was like diagnosed.
Oops.
Okay.
You're back. Sorry, Bhante. Keep going.
Gotcha. No worries. Yeah. So the way he kind of basically calls out our underlying tendencies in that sutta, it's like, what does somebody do when they have a pleasant experience? Well, they attach to it. That's the anusia. That's the underlying, I like to translate it as like underlying habitual tendency. Right? And what's the underlying habitual tendency when we have an unpleasant experience? The Buddha says, because we don't know another way of escape, it's to drown ourselves in pleasant experience. Right. So this is actually, and I've later found out that going to various Buddhist recovery places, this is like a Bible sutta in Buddhist recovery places, because it's really pointing to that, why we do the things that we do. So that's, I would say, is kind of probably one of my favorite, pretty well-known ones. I think one that in the last half of my Buddhist path that really deserves to be way more known is the Bara Sutta, the burden. And actually, I realized that the forest Dhamma, the
Amaravati chanting book.
Yeah, the forest book. It had it when I went to a Biography for the first time. I was like, oh, this is great.
Yeah,
the chanting book actually has it.
Yeah.
What's that?
In the newer edition, in the last 10 years. Before that, it wasn't there.
Yeah, and it has like the second half. Really, it's the verses. The second half that it has. It doesn't have the sutta end, but still, it's. I was happy to see that because it really. Again, I think it's one of those suttas where it's a page, but it encapsulates the whole teaching. I'll teach you of the. Oh, go ahead, Asha.
Oh, no, please just go. I listened to your discourse on this recently, including the part about you doing a military style backpack and really intuiting the power of this. But no, please describe it in detail a bit more.
Yeah. No, so the Buddha says, I'll teach you the burden, the carrier of the burden, the picking up of the burden, and the laying down of the burden. So the burden is the 5 aggregate subject to clinging, which in short is dukkha, right? So you're carrying around your suffering, like in this big burden of your suffering. And this also connects to the way I don't remember where I first heard it years ago, but somebody kind of like said, if you break down dukkha, the way you can kind of describe it is as that which is difficult to bear. right? So that also matches this kind of burden, this like backpack motif of, you're carrying around your baggage. The Buddha said, you're carrying around this burden, right? Which is your suffering. And then the person, the carrier of the burden is the person, the pugala, which Bhante Sujato actually recently made a post about this that I was happy to see, because I've kind of always suspected when we're talking about the pugala, we're going into anatta here, right? Because there's a sutta where the Buddhist, Sariputta is asked, identity, what is identity? And the answer is the 5 aggregate subject to clinging. Right, so the Buddha is literally connecting the creation of identity with the creation of suffering. Mm-hmm. So the Buddha is saying that we create this burden, we create this person, and through our craving, we lift it up, we carry it around. And when we let go, which is the third noble truth, right? Right, when we let it go, then we have cessation, we're free. So you see the noble truths in this too. Right, the picking up of the burden, that's the second noble truth. The burden itself is the first noble truth. So it's like the noble truth in this very profound little sutta that I wish more teachers taught, because I can't, there's many suttas where I was like, how come I never saw this? All the thousands of Dhamma talks I heard over years and years, I never heard any teacher, talk. This is one of the benefits of reading the suttas. You find these hidden gems.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. It's so small, and it's just in the Samyutta Nikaya, I believe. But yeah, just Samyutta is so big, and just one page, as you say. I think we'll probably go more kind of back and forth into maybe a little bit more of your biography as you go, which people can see the last 17 years of, if they go to your YouTube channel on Mugga Seka. Really, it's a fascinating document, kind of a travel log of a spiritual journey from you as a layman 17 years ago, I think you're still working at the time, and just, I'm starting this channel and I'm going to talk about my journey into Buddhism and my love of Buddhism, and all the way through until you're moving towards homelessness, moving towards becoming a monk. Your ordination is there, and then you're basically up until the present is all there as well. One of the videos there was when you were still as a layman going through your bookshelf, and to look like many of our bookshelves did before we became monks, with the 4 main Nikayas, and then teachings from Ajahn Thanissaro, Ajahn Chah, Ajahn Brahm, and a bunch by Bhante Ji, which is where you went to end up ordaining. And he himself has such a focus on the suttas, and your love of suttas. It makes total sense that you would kind of click with him and have that shared affinity. Could you take us back to your time with Bhante Ji? I think you lived with him for 5 or 7 years, and tell us, what was that like? Any stories that you can bring through? Would love to have only met him on a number of occasions. We interviewed him twice, but certainly haven't lived with him for any period of time. So.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I went to Bhavana for about 3 years before I went to live there as a monk, and I was doing retreats. So like the first time, 2011 Thanksgiving retreat was my first ever theravada retreat. I had done a retreat with the Mahayana, the place that I mentioned where I took the refuge in precepts in 2008. So I went to this place, and I got there, and I just felt so. I was like, I remember when back before this was, did I have a smartphone? Anyway, I don't remember. But anyway, I had a GPS unit, and when I was leaving Bhavana that first time, I set Bhavana as home on my GPS. It's like, this is my home. I can tell, like, this is. Because by that point, I had already had thoughts of what I wanted to ordain. I didn't know where, but after that first visit there, I was like, okay, I think this is it. This is the place. It was only a 5-hour drive, which is not bad considering there's few places in America, unless you're lucky enough to live near these kind of places. It's going to be a hike to get there. And so interestingly enough, actually, I didn't have a relationship much with Bhante Gunaratana until I lived there, because when I started going there, he was going through multiple heart attack periods. Like, he was actually quite ill, and he wasn't really teaching much. I got to know better Bhante Silananda, who is a Sri Lankan monk who was there for about 12 years. It wasn't really until, after the 3 years of visiting that I really kind of left the world and went to move there, that I really got to know Bhante. And, it's one of those things where he is, there's no kind of air, right? It's like you just walk in and he looks and he just smiles and he'll say, hello, and and he's like that kind of behind the scenes as well. He's like, obviously when we all do Dhamma talks, maybe there's a little bit of a kind of orator that comes out. But when a monk who, is kind of giving a talk is basically the same as if you were driving them around and talking to them, which I also try to be, because I think that's the very kind of genuine way to be. It's just kind of really nice to have that experience with him. I guess there's a few things. I can't believe it's been it was 12 years ago that I moved there. Time is flying. But some of the memories I remember most is I remember when I first moved there, I think maybe I was in Anagarika, and it's interesting, my practice a year or 2 years as I was in Bhavana, I felt like my practice was feeling like it was getting worse than when I was a layperson. I felt even like my metta was kind of going away. It didn't feel as powerful and as strong and all these kind of things. And I was bringing Bhante his kind of evening drink in his room. And I asked him, and, I said, Bhante, I don't have the feeling of metta like I used to and all this stuff. And he looked at me and he said, Jayasāra, until you have a deeper understanding of anicca, your metta will only be skin deep. And that kind of was I fully understand what he means now. And I agree with it. And I teach the same. I understand it. But that was a real kind of very profound thought that I didn't connect. So being able to live with him, you kind of get these little glimpses. But on the other hand, to be honest with you, and maybe I don't know if this is the same way with Luangpur Pasino, but when you're kind of well known, you're living at the monastery, but you're fighting with the world for their attention. Because I can remember just people all the time just calling Bhante and trying to get in contact with Bhante. And so, my living there and growing there, I didn't have kind of what you would think of as a kind of traditional tie, I'm the student and, these kind of things. And Bhante Gunaratana said to me, Jayasāra, you came to me a mature meditator. And I said, yeah, but I'm a baby monk. I need, so I'm a mature meditator, sure, but I'm a baby monk. But yeah, so there is that kind of unfortunate thing where you're competing with a lot of people who want to be, take the time of the famous monk.
Bhante, would you sorry.
No, go ahead.
When we interviewed Bhante Gunaratana, I think he's 103 now?
198, I think he is.
98. I mean, and yeah. I think he's been in robes since 12 or so, and just one of the most bright, luminous hearts I've ever met. And he also said, when we asked him the one teaching that had resonated with him through the years, he said, anicca sanya, perception of impermanence, which is what you're pointing to here. So how do you see his statement? How would you explain it? How does a true understanding of anicca bring about metta?
Mm-hmm. So I would say the more and more my kind of insight grows, the more I really see anicca as the central teaching of all of Buddhism in a way. And when you think about like the three characteristics of existence, right? The characteristic, anicca, is the Buddha is telling us, sabbe sankhara anicca, that everything you will ever experience is unstable and undependable. It's impermanent, but that's kind of an overused word. But really, that kind of feeling, unstable and undependable, everything, right? But we actually don't live like that, right? We don't live, what I like to say these days is like, you know, the environmentalist people will say, we don't live in line with nature, right, as modern humans. And I will agree with that statement, but from a Buddhist perspective, right? You know, Dhamma, you know, the nature, the reality of things, we don't like to live in line with the nature of reality, i.e. that everything is unstable and undependable. So we kind of delude ourselves, and we build like a fantasy world around ourselves, a bubble that we're trying to protect ourselves from the reality that is anicca. And so to me, the more you understand anicca, the more you understand the state of the nature of this reality, of the samsaric state, it is just so natural that all of a sudden goodwill for all beings. It doesn't matter, oh, I don't like this person, they're bad in this life or whatever. Yeah, well, we've all been bad. Like, the way I say it is like every single person you will ever meet has an untold lifetime's amount of stores of good and bad deeds. We've all pick whoever you think is the worst person that's ever existed. We've all done that, and we've all picked the person you've done, you know, who's the best person you ever think that has ever existed. We've been that.
Yeah, you were Caesar, right? And Alexander the Great.
So. Exactly. So when you kind of have that understanding, it's very natural that whoever you meet, even if you're like with somebody who is a serial killer, a horrible person, etc., it's just very natural that you just have this goodwill towards them. Doesn't mean that you condone what they said or anything. You know, when I was a child protective service worker before, you know, I became a monk, and I sat across people who were like child molesters and gang leaders of gangs and things like that. And even in those early days, I always tried to make sure to remember I'm talking to a human being first. Everything else second. We have to deal with business. We have to deal with law stuff. Okay, but first human being. And when you really understand anicca and that metta grows, it's like whoever it is, whatever they've done, they're a fellow sibling in suffering, right? They are a fellow being in samsara. And again, it doesn't mean you condone what they've done. Doesn't mean that they probably need to spend the rest of their life in jail or whatever, right? You're not condoning the bad things they've done, but you see at a more transcendent level. And that transcendent level is that all beings are siblings in suffering. All beings are deserving of your goodwill and friendliness, if only for the development of, or the destruction of, you know, anger and ill will and resentment in your own mind. So that's kind of how I see anicca and metta being connected. The deeper you understand the nature of reality, the easier it is to have natural goodwill for all beings. You know, not like when somebody's kind of new and they're doing metta and like, may all beings except for that person be well, happy, and be, you know, even I remember my mind the same way. Not that person, not those people, not that group, you know, this political party, not that one, whatever. I remember my mind being that way. But yeah.
Bhante, when I was an Anagarika, Bhante Ji came to visit Abhayagiri for about a week or two, and I was very, very inspired. And I remember I was going through a bit of a rough time in my monastic life, and I remember just so happened that I kind of fell in love with the 28 Buddhas protection chant, which is this kind of protection chant roughly based on the Atanatiya Sutta. So it's not really straight from the suttas. But I came up to Bhante Ji one morning, nobody else was in the hall. I didn't have to fight for his attention, and came up and I said, Bhante, I'm so inspired by the 28 Buddhas protection. If you would give me your blessing and tell me it was a good thing, I would chant it every day for the next year. And he said, there is no Dhamma in the 28 days of protection. He said, no Dhamma. You should memorize the Dhammacakka Pavattana Sutta, the Buddha's first discourse. So I did that, memorized that, chanted it every day. But do you have any similar kind of spicy Bhante Ji stories? I mean, he's such a small frame, and the metta is massive, but it can also, I felt it on those 2 weeks, it can be spicy at times as well. Do you have any spicy Bhante Ji stories, maybe specifically in relation to you?
Trying to think.
Or relation to Ajahn Kovila too. Any more on him?
It's been so long. Well, this is, again, it's important that you are straightforward, right? Like, I guess, I mean, the only thing that comes to my mind is, I remember when Bhante Uparatana, who's kind of like a disciple of Bhante Gunaratana, I mean, he's now been in robes, I think, by this point, 60 years or close to it. So he's a senior monk in Washington, D.C. And his mother died. And we were at this funeral, and Bhante Ji was, giving kind of like a talk. And coming from the West, like I kind of expected, like what you say at a funeral. And Bhante Ji just goes right into like Dhamma and Anicca and Nibbana. And I was like, whoa, this is interesting. Like, like, cause just the kind of the enculturation of the West was like, you're not going to be like, oh yeah, this person is, you're probably never going to see them again. They're a being in samsara, wish them, to attain the sweet bliss of Nibbana. And I'm like, oh, this is, so yeah, he was always very, when it comes to the Dhamma, he was always what they call a straight shooter, right? He didn't want to mess around. Like another one kind of what in the same vein is metta. Like he would say, one of his statements that I still use myself is metta is not magic, right? Because there's lots of kind of almost like new agey kind of vibes about metta and things like that. And that's not the kind of metta you see in the suttas, right? And so he's very straight on like what is metta. And really what metta is about your own mind. Right? It's about eradicating all the ill will in your own mind, and developing that feeling of friendliness for all beings. You're not really like sending out vibes and things like that. But on the other hand, we also know that the benefits of metta can cause some real magical stuff. Now, I've experienced that myself. Weird stuff like spiders doing walking meditation with me and stuff like that. So yeah, so metta is very powerful, but Bhante wants to make sure that at least from the sutta, the early Buddhist text perspective, what the Buddha really taught. And Bhante Gunaratana, just like most Sri Lankan monks, he's very well versed in the Abhidhamma, the commentary. He knows all that stuff. He knows all of it. But he has always just chosen to teach from the suttas. I guess one more thing that still is very profound to this day. I don't think I was living there yet. I think I was at a retreat, and it was during a Q&A. And I don't remember the question, but Bhante Ji said, he says, I'm not a teacher. The Buddha is the only teacher. I'm just a Kalyanamitta. And that was like, yes, that was very profound. Like, even to this day, I don't like being called a teacher. Like when people say, are you going somewhere? I'm like, yeah, I'm going to share Dhamma, right? Like I don't like, it's like, because I'm just sharing the Dhamma, right? I'm just a Kalyanamitta. I really love that, that kind of statement. Right. And of course, we know from the sutras, the Buddha says that he's the best Kalyanamitta as well. But yeah, that was to see somebody who is, like you're saying, so many years in robes, been teaching for so long, who, in my opinion, is definitely among the top Dhamma teachers in the world, in Theravada at least. To see somebody kind of have that humility, it was very profound. I really enjoyed that. And it was like, yep, that's going to be me too. The Buddha is the only teacher. So, yeah.
I remember at the end of my interview with Bhante Ji, I asked him if he had any advice for me personally, and he said, "Don't disrobe." and and I do want to ask about that spider doing walking meditation or other kind of similarly amazing stories. But perhaps before that, you talk about how Bhante Ji kind of didn't take up that burden of identity of the teacher. And even the Buddha, when he attained enlightenment and said, "Who should I hold as my teacher? One who dwells without respect dwells in suffering." And he says, "I'll dwell with reverence to the Dhamma." And you talking about, more and more seeing, like in the Bara Sutta, that this burden is of identity is intimately linked with suffering. And I'm curious how, if, without identity and with this deep understanding of impermanence and the fact that all these things you're building and touching will fall away, how do you navigate? How do you find your path through samsara, Bhante? And like, what guides you, and what advice would you have for someone listening who is, caught between burdens and distractions and Netflix and politics and anger and just trying to find what the Dharma wants them to do, or to follow a life of Dhamma? How should they tune into that without just relying on identity? How does one follow the Dhamma in life? How have you?
Well, I think, especially for somebody who's kind of new, it's very important for them to understand that gaining insight into anatta is not like disassociation or like some kind of mental illness, or like it's like scary. It's actually not. It's blissful. I mean, in one of the chantings that, I think it might be in the Amarati chanting as well, but it's like the destruction or the abandoning of the conceit I am is the highest bliss. Right? Every time we chant that, I'm like, oh, that's so wonderful. That's so nice. And, it's one of those things where you really have to experience the abandoning of the conceit I am. And I don't mean like at a full level, but like experience how you kind of go through this checklist of investigation of, is this me, mine, and myself? Oh, no, it's not actually. I see that. Is this me, mine, and myself? No, it's not actually. I see that. Right? And so is your political view me, mine, myself? Is it? How did you develop it? Where did it come from? Right? Is this view this? So it's kind of like this, starting to deeply understand how the causes and conditions have come together to create you. Right? We're talking about the creation of identity. Right? We're born, we're given a name. And we're born into a culture, so that kind of shapes us a little bit. We're born into a family, that shapes us a little bit. But then we're not that old, even like a year old, when we start saying, okay, I like this, I don't like that. We're building this character, we're building this creation. And as we get older, we solidify our views even more. And it's through those solidifying of the views that we start to create more friction, more suffering. What does Ajahn Chah talk about? Like holding, but not strongly. Just holding very lightly. And that's very wise. Ajahn Chah is amazing. I love his teachings. But the problem is we're just holding on, and we're really attached to, I am this. It's like when the Buddha has the three knowledges, right? And he says, I was of such and such name, such and such clan. This was my food. This was even like he remembers all like what the person was and what their attachments and what their identity was, even those past lives. But as we follow the Noble Eightfold Path, as we develop the path, it is very natural that your insight and wisdom arises, and you just don't feel so strongly attached to these things that keep us wrapped up. One of my favorite sayings is actually not from Theravada. It's Milarepa. Right? Milarepa says, "The affairs of the world are never ending. Do not neglect your meditation." I was like, sadhu, very good. I've heard some good things about this Milarepa. I like that statement. You know, but that's so wise. That's so kind of, but it's as you develop the path, you just naturally want to hold things a lot more lightly, because you realize it's suffering if you hold it too strongly. And then eventually, as you go more subtle, you realize actually it's suffering holding on to it at all. And you have your nibbida arising, your viraga arising, and then your vimutti. Just put it down and you're done. You lay down the burden. Right? When I do my guided meditations, I give a little thing about like laying down the burden for now. Right? Just for the time of the meditation, lay down the burden. And I say, don't worry, there'll be plenty of time to pick it back up again later. And the reason I say that is because when I started doing it myself, I noticed it's like, oh, I don't want to lay down the burden. I'm like, oh, you stupid idiot. Okay, no, don't worry, you can pick it up later. If you really want it, you're really this dumb, you can pick it up later. So, yeah, I don't know. I hope I answered most of that, but yeah.
The one little bit there that I'm curious about is like, if you're holding things lightly, fair enough, but is there something that kind of gleams that draws you on in line with Dhamma? Like, I know you're creating something in Colorado now. Like, is there something, once you're letting go of all those identities a bit, how would you articulate what's left guiding you, or would you, how you feel that?
So I would say that I had some insights into anatta fairly early on, maybe like, at this point, maybe like 15 years ago or so, but it wasn't until more recently that I understood more deeply about dependent origination, that I understood. So anatta is, okay, you have a thought arise in your mind, and before you just automatically accepted it, then you realize, oh wait, this is not me. I don't have to accept this thought. And so that's the kind of starting to understand anatta. But the deeper understanding is, okay, I don't have to accept this thought as me, mine, myself, but I created that thought in the past and I fed it and it's come back. Like I've literally created the causes and conditions for anger and hatred and all these things that arise in my mind to come. They're not just coming out of anywhere. The Buddha is very clear, like things don't just magically happen, right? Things happen. When this arises, that arises. When this ceases, that ceases. So everything that's arising in my mind, I have fed, right? The Buddha talks about ahara, starving, nourishment, feeding something and starving something. So whatever is arising in my mind, I've fed it in the past. I kind of, the image that came in my mind was like a swing, like you're pushing a kid on a swing. And you're giving the momentum. And of course, every kid who has ever wanted to swing always wanted to do the thing where they go all the way around, right? Push it and see if they can get it all the way around. And it's like, wait a second, that's samsara. That's like, okay, this anger has come into my mind. I've fed it. I've given it the momentum. It's like I've pushed it and it comes back around, right? And every time it comes back around, I keep pushing it and it keeps coming. It coming back stronger, more often, faster. But what if I say, oh, wait a second, okay, this is not me, not mine, not myself. However, that alone does not have it become abandoned in my mind. How about I starve it? It comes back around, I don't push it, no momentum, I let it go. Comes back around again, but it's weaker. Oh, okay, not touching it, comes back around again, it's weaker. So you start to realize, actually, well, this is the process. This is actually what is happening. We kind of create another level of identity over it. But the process is of volitional formations, choices that are being made that are creating causes and conditions for things to arise in the future. So when you kind of know you know how to kind of hack into that system, you're like, oh, okay, well, if I want to lead to awakening, this is what I have to do. This is what I have to do to develop. The Noble Eightfold Path is essentially kind of doing that, right? It's creating the causes and conditions for the abandoning of your suffering.
Hmm.
And there doesn't need to be a kind of identity over that. It's the causes and conditions. It's like in the Matrix when Neo first sees the things like the code behind, and he's like, and like he realizes he can actually like adjust it and things like that, right? That's what it's like. It's like, oh, wait a second. Oh, this is dependent origination. This is what the Buddha is talking about. This is the key. Okay. I'm going to now try to do my best to create the causes and conditions for suffering to be lessened, not increased.
Bhante, could you talk a little bit about your online communities, specifically the Discord server, the Students on the Path, or Mugga Seka, and also could you just answer, what is Dhammapalooza?
So yeah, it's actually 10 years this May coming up. We'll have the Discord. So I've always been kind of related to my YouTube channel because I was the only Buddhist I knew in my daily life, because I didn't have monasteries near me. Most of my learning and everything for years was online. First time I ever heard a Buddhist monk talk live was in a virtual world program called Second Life, where the Buddhist monk who Bhante Yuttadhammo, actually. Bhante Yuttadhammo had a little virtual monk character, and I sat on a little virtual monk, meditation seat in a virtual deer park, and I heard him speak. Like, oh, I'm hearing a Buddhist monk for the first time ever. It wasn't like at a local vihara or something like that. So because of kind of my practice in my formative years of learning Buddhism was online, I'm very keen of kind of like paying attention to new ways that I can share the Dhamma. Like if you've heard of a social media, I'm on it. Doesn't mean I'm actually using it. Like there's like just to test it, I'll go on it and I'll see. Like, I mean, technically I'm on TikTok, but I've really not done much. Or, my nephew who's 21 is kind of starting to help me, and maybe some other people are starting to help me because TikTok seems to be the place. But so I'm just trying to always like keep up on like what new avenues can the Dhamma be shared on. And the Discord came up, and I was like, oh, wait a second. This looks like an interesting thing. You know what it was? On Reddit, I got invited to a interfaith Discord. I'm like, what the heck is a Discord? And what? That doesn't sound very Buddhist. What is going on with this Discord thing? But I was invited, and I saw it, and I'm like, and I was a video gamer before I was a monk. So I was like, I kind of knew those kind of things when you play games with people. And that's what Discord was created for. It was created for gamers. And I was looking at it, I'm like, oh, this is good for a Buddhist community. This is really good. And it just started out with like 4 or 5 of us. It was very small. It was like myself and 1 or 2 people from Bhavana, a young friend, supporter of mine, and also a who is now Venerable Pasanash, Bhikkhuni. They're a Bhikkhuni in Australia. And I think it was Ayasantachari, also an Australian Bhikkhuni who Venerable Pasana knew as a layperson. So we kind of just had this very small group that got together. And even since almost the beginning, we've been reading suttas every Sunday. We've gone through Digha Nikaya, Majjhima Nikaya, Samyutta Nikaya, all the early Buddhist texts, Khuddaka, the Khuddaka Nikaya, and now we're in the Anguttara. So I think we have another year or so of weekends at least to finish the Anguttara, but we've been doing it for a long time. And the amount of people on it has like kind of, just waves. People come and it gets busy, and then kind of people go away. But we're still kind of there 10 years later, just still doing the same thing. There we have Aya Sudama, who's a very senior bhikkhuni in North Carolina, and who's also kind of a lineage sister. She's all from Bhante Ji, right? So she's on there, and Venerable Pasana now is also who's 6 Vasa now, I think. So they're on there. So it's like we have the Fourfold Assembly most Sundays that comes together and reads the suttas, and it's just great, you know. And of course, then there's other activities that we do as well, but that's like the main activity. Like people will say, like, you know, type in the morning, meditating for a half hour. Whoever's around who wants to join, just, you know, can join. And, you know, I give like a little greeting every morning. So it's just a kind of like just trying to foster a community. Although sometimes I do neglect it. I don't show up on the Discord for a day or two because I'm busy doing other things, or I just want to, you know, kind of be by myself. But I have wonderful mods and people who actually, I think 2 of my mods are now monastics in different places, like Empty Cloud and things like that. But
Dhammapalooza?
Oh, Dhammapalooza, thank you. Yeah. So at the beginning of COVID, I wanted to, because I was out of Bhavana at that point, and I was like, you know what, I want to do like a weekly stream. And I said, Monday, I think, is a good night because, you know, it won't compete. Most people are not going to have a stream on Monday night. And I just kind of wanted to, I don't know where the name came. I mean, the name came from, like, I was a kind of metalhead guitarist, you know, in the 90s, and you know, your Lollapalooza and things like that. And of course, you know, you look it up. Actually, this is a word that comes from like the late 1800s, right? It's not like, you know, they kind of took it from back then. And it's like a festival. And so it's like Dhammapalooza is like a festival of Dhamma, right? And that's how I introduced it it's the festival of Dhamma, where the Maggaseka community does a variety of Dhamma-related activities. Do a little chanting, do some meditation, you know, Dhamma talks, Q&A, sutta reading. It's kind of a little different each time. Sometimes we do a thing called Sutta Roulette, which is kind of a fun thing that we've developed. And the way it works is we'll do so I'll say a number, I'll say, okay, we're going to do the Samyutta Nikaya tonight, a number between 1 and 20, okay? And they pick a number, and then the second number. So it's like we're picking the chapter and the sutta number, and then we're just reading whatever that sutta is. So it's like a fun way to kind of involve people, and just, we don't know what we're going to read. We're going to just randomly pick a number, and then we're going to pop it up on Sutta Central, and we're going to read it. So this is kind of like, I try to, you know, make it interesting and fun, and also have fun myself. So.
On the subject of community, Bhante, is, you know, these online communities have been kind of a unifying thread through even this period of being a monastic, but you also really have gotten quite an experience with stopping in at, you know, Bhavana Society, living at Empty Cloud. You've spent time at Abhayagiri, you visited Aloka Vihara, you visited Parayana Vihara elsewhere. KBV. So you've seen all these different models of monasteries in the modern age, and now you're, you know, contemplating starting your own vihara in Colorado. And I'm curious, you know, having seen so many models of how people are holding this balance or tension between, you know, the ancient Buddhist form and modern kind of understandings or dynamics. You know, how much do you make room for kind of modern interpretations of things? How much do you ground in these old structures? Maybe the angle I'm actually most interested in is just to ask, yeah, what community dynamics have you seen most kind of nourishing for Westerners ordaining these days? Like, how would you structure a monastery for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 monastics that, you know, after all these different examples you've seen?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, to be honest with you, in terms of training young monastics, in my opinion, Abhayagiri has most of the best ways of doing it. I really believe it's not for everybody, but, you know, it's like at Bhavana Society, there were young monastics that one ordained right before me, and the other one ordained right after, and they just end up disrobing. And I realize it's like, especially for young monastics, you need like a support system and a way of nurturing them and nourishing them so that they can kind of get through the hard, parts of transitioning to becoming a monastic and all of that. And I think, in my experience, Abhayagiri has a lot of that right. Not everything, not everything that I would personally do, but a lot of it right, I think. But one of the things that I kind of see in the more traditional Buddhist spaces in terms of monasticism is, when you read the suttas and you read like the Vinaya really deeply, you kind of see that in a lot of ways that's not how like living in a monastery is. Like, you read like how like, the senior monastic is supposed to look upon the junior as a son, and the son, the junior to the monastic as a father. And if, there's the senior monastic, has a doubt or has a problem or is kind of not doing something right, the junior monastic should call them out. Like it's a very interesting dynamic that the Buddha set up, the Buddha encouraged himself, that doesn't seem to be, it seems to have been lost over thousands of years of development in different countries, and doing the countries kind of developing the way they do things themselves. So the kind of like the balance you were talking about, I personally feel like there's some people monastic wise who are kind of very like, how should I say, like the view is like all this old stuff is very like misogynist and this is bad, we're throwing away the whole thing, we're going to start all new. And I think that's wrong, to be honest with you. And then there's other people, more specifically, people who are coming, born in Buddhist cultures, and they'll say, this is the right way, and you can't do all these things, this is not, this is not Buddhism. And I also think in the context of America, that that's also wrong for people outside of their culture. So it's kind of like, how do you find a balance between having real respect and carrying forth the wisdom of Sri Lankan Buddhism, Thai Buddhism, Burmese Buddhism, because there's a lot of great stuff on all of that. And how do you bring that while also kind of adapting to the new world? And so that's kind of been something that I think about a lot, because I do think that things should change. But I also don't think we should go too far, because I do feel we should be grounded in the Vinaya. But even the Buddha gives, the Buddha says, one thing I forgot, I think I was talking to some monastics, so we kind of talking about this. Oh, I think it was during one of my last, the sutta readings on the Discord. And I said, think about what the Buddha had done. The Buddha, on the one hand, says, my disciples do not even breach the smallest rules for the sake of their own life, which is something that is just straight to my heart. And I really want to live like that, but it's really hard to do that outside of a Buddhist country or a place with lots of support. On the other hand, the Buddha also says, when I'm gone, the monastics can abolish the lesser rules. So what is the Buddha saying? You have the ability to change the rules, but you should also then follow them. That kind of mindset is not seen in modern day Buddhist cultures. That's not how it is. How it is the arahants of old decided not to change any of the rules, so we're not going to do it. That's kind of like, so the Buddha says, okay, you can change this, but then live by it.
Yeah.
And that's very wise to me. The Buddha is a master of anicca. Did the Buddha really not think that rules would not have to change as Buddhism grew and adapted and went? And this is another Bhante Ji story, because I remember when I first started thinking about the Vasa, I'm like, wait a second. The Vasa in America makes no sense. The summertime is the busiest time. Everybody's, even at Abhayagiri, it's the same way. Even though, Bhavana is a retreat center, so a lot of people are coming to Abhayagiri, it's the same way. It's busy. That's a busy time, right? What's the time that's the most secluded? The winter retreat, right now, right? And that's how it was at Bhavana as well. We had what winter retreat was called seclusion of Bhavana. And I thought, well, can we like switch the Vasa to like the winter? it makes sense, right? If you read the Vinaya, understand why the Vasa came about. Okay, it makes sense. Well, that's the winter in America, right? And I remember I talking to Bhante Gunaratana and saying, Bhante, he's like, have you ever thought about it? He says, Jayasāra, he says, I actually tried to bring this up and like talk to other monks about this, and they didn't want to have anything to do with it. So I, he was such a trendsetter in some ways, but he was too far behind. He was too ahead of his time, and he had one foot in Sri Lanka. What I mean by that is he couldn't do a lot of the things that he wanted to do, to change, to adapt to the new world. But he was very visionary in that way. But I, as somebody born in this country, as part of that next generation, I can actually do things. He said, but maybe if you go to these meetings with other monks, talk to them, you might actually, maybe other monks will agree. So I said, I doubt it, but, and even I've even thought more about if that's a wise thing to do, now as I've become more senior as a monk and understanding. But like, it is one of those things where, well, I mean, does that need to change?
Yeah, no,
Should it change?
Yeah, it's fascinating balancing this tradition with modernity and these norms which have been around for a long time and maybe lost and maybe coming back. I mean, I honestly did, when I was training at a Abhayagiri, really did look to Lumpur Pasano as a father. I mean, he really was, I was in my 20s and he was in his maybe later 50s, but it really felt like that. But I think if we decided, we're going to do Vasa in the winter and just do whatever we want in the summer during, the Vasa months, he might disown me as a child.
Yeah.
And just for people to know, Vasa is the rains retreat, a 3-month traditional period where monastics stay in one spot. And in India, it's during the months which are over here are the summer months when it makes very little sense to be stuck in one spot. So this is a perennial debate since Western monastics came to the West, is like, should we switch it or not? And what we've done is kind of hold a winter retreat, but then officially observe the Vasa with a 1-month retreat there too.
So it's like we get both.
Yeah, the best of both worlds. Bhante, we should wrap up soon and go over to Zoom, and we'll post a link to Zoom in the chat. And Bhante, despite it being 10 p.m., is planning to join us. But before we do that, 2 questions. First, would you describe briefly your vision of the vihara you're hoping to create in Colorado and how people can tap into that? And then you should finish with the story about the spider doing walking meditation or something, if you could.
So what I'm trying to do in Colorado, in one sense, is not very different than most places. I'm kind of trying to start small and eventually have as you said, I've been to these places and and I see a lot of similarities of how they started. And oftentimes it's kind of starting in a more centralized city location, having the support, and then having the monastery outside, and then on the weekends coming into the city. Right. That's when I was a new Buddhist watching Ajahn Brahm's Friday night talks, he was giving the talks not at the monastery but at the city center. And so, eventually, the long story of Maggaseka, if there's enough support and it grows and it develops, is the idea is we start small, in a little apartment or a little, then hopefully a rented house in Colorado and Denver, and then eventually, as support grows, get bigger, and then start a monastery, hopefully in the Rockies, and then eventually a retreat center, because I do feel I love the part of Bhavana that was a retreat center. I didn't like that the monastery was a retreat center, because that's rough on junior monks. That's very rough on junior monks. But I like how Ajahn Brahm has it. It's at least like a mile separated. So I think that's a good way of doing things. But so right now we're just such in early stages. But the eventual hope is to do what many other places have already done. Build a monastery, retreat center, city center, and all that kind of stuff over the years and the decades. The only pioneering aspect of it is I'm doing it in the center of the country, which is not that much Dhamma. And really feel like we should start building more places in the center, because there's lots on the coasts. But yeah,
path.
so that's kind of, what's that?
Middle path.
Yes, middle path, exactly. And so that's kind of, where that's heading out. And if anybody is interested, I guess the website to check myself and the organization out is maggasekha.org, MAGGASEKHA.org. And so that's where we're at. It's small endeavor right now, but hopefully it'll grow. And when I was with you all in person back in November, and I got to see your Saturday session, and I was very inspired by that. And I said, hopefully this is 3, 4, or 5 years in Colorado, this will be kind of like the same thing. So, yeah.
Bhante, we will put the link to that into the description for people. And we just wish you all the best. And we appreciate you as a brother monastic, and hope this relationship goes for a long time, many lifetimes, unless may we achieve liberation before too long. Before we go over to Zoom, though, I think you owe us one quick story about a spider doing walking meditation with you, or something similar.
So one of my last retreats at Bhavana, I shared a kuti with a spider that was a pretty menacing looking spider. And I never had too many issues with spiders, but there's some big ones. There's like wolf spiders at Bhavana that are not quite the size of my hand, but they're big. And so I, remember just sharing actually I did an article about this on, you can find it on my website from years and years ago, but I shared for a 9-day jhana retreat at Bhavana, I shared with this spider, and I just remember being so afraid, looking up at the kuti and seeing the spider above me, and I'm I just was practicing lots of metta, and that just started an especially kind of especially giving lots of metta to spiders. And after years I started just having these weird experiences, I'm doing walking meditation in the hall at Bhavana, and a spider's walking right next to me, and I'm like, okay, this is whatever. But I stop and I turn around, and it stops and it turns around and it starts following me. And I'm like, okay, this is whatever. That's just coincidence. By the third or fourth time, I was like, okay, this is metta. This is. I am actually experiencing this. I think by the 7th time, it was done. It was like, okay, that's enough. But and then during one of my winter seclusions, where I spent a month in up in this. Where the bhikkhunis used to stay at Bhavana when there were bhikkhunis, in this little kind of house that I was staying by myself, not talking to anybody for the month, etc. I'm just in this chair, just doing some reading, and a wolf spider just comes right up to the edge of the chair and just hanging out right there. I'm like, okay, no problem. Lots of metta for you, Mr. Spider, but you stay here. Don't go on me. It's like that story about the Thai monk with the snake in the kuti. It's like, well, if we had to live together, one of us would be afraid and get hurt. So it's better that you depart. So it was one of those things where it's you could stay there, just don't come on my body, because I probably will freak out. So there are limitations.
Wow. Bhante J, Spider King. I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
Bhante, we'll see you over on Zoom in just a bit. And people, feel free to join us there. We wish you all the best, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.